The F.e.a.r series is back, and where better to start than an obscure, extremely short DLC that should have had its video in March. F.e.a.r 2 had a DLC, not an expansion, and only one instead of two like the first game. It was called F.e.a.r 2 Reborn, and it released 7 months after the main game did. This DLC is 90 minutes long, and that's okay. It's not like there has to be a minimum length, but there's no way in hell that it took them 7 months to make this. You'll see what I mean as we go on. The first thing you'll see in Reborn is guess who? That's right, Paxton is not Baxton yet. No, this DLC tells the story of Paxton coming Baxton for his appearance in F.e.a.r 3. But I must admit, getting blown away really did a number on Paxton. I mean, look at him. He looks like a geography teacher. He looks more like a Harold Davis than a Paxton Fettel. Why is his hair grey? And is he balding? Who in God's name decided that this would be better than just bringing back the original creepy angular face and slick black hair? I almost don't want Paxton to come back now, and I never thought I'd have to say those words. At least his voice actor Peter Lurie makes a return.
Stand before me. Let me look upon you.
But even there, he doesn't sound anywhere near as smooth as he did last game. After that intro, you play as a replica soldier in a fight against Armor-Cam. You, replica Foxtrot 813, are being dropped in from orbit with power armor. You fight through waves of Armor-Cam on quite possibly the greyest environment ever designed for games, look at a cool Crisis set piece, and then link up with your buddies. It's pretty cool being a replica for the first time and seeing firsthand how they operate. The HUD is totally revamped, and while still obnoxiously present, the contrast of orange against the usual blue is cool. Things start happening when Paxton shows up and hacks your brain. He transports you to the apocalypse, a great way of getting anyone to side with you. He tells you that you're different from the others while you're being attacked by Ghost Replica who wildly teleport about as they shoot. You're fully voiced as Replica 813 and naturally you have no idea just what the hell is going on. This sequence is great. The objective Submit is eerie and the room you were just in being transformed into this hellscape is a great visual change, both from a story perspective and from a too much fucking brown and grey perspective. After you come back into the real world, you see that all those ghosts were your comrades. Paxton demands that you set him free, and the rest of this DLC is trying to do so. You lose your voice and personality after this point, but you also get reflex mode, probably because you're being controlled as evidenced by the very unusual objectives. The replica know you've gone rogue, so you're on your own, and they're hunting you. One of the first arenas against the replica shows an interesting dynamic. You have no weapons, and you have to kill your fellow replica with melee attacks to get theirs. Then you can begin hunting them, which expands into one of the best arenas in the DLC. Generally, the level design of the following arenas is some of the best in the game. According to producer Lucas Myers, one of the main goals the team set out to achieve with F.e.a.r 2 Reborn was to come up with new and interesting environments that would expand on what we put into the original game. We went to great pains to offer our fans as much diversity as possible within the new campaign. Ultimately, we wanted to show off environments that kept our audience interested by providing more open and vertical spaces than we had achieved in the past. End quote. This design philosophy seems identical to the one that Timegate had gone for with Extraction Point, though Monolith certainly wasn't as successful. If by more open spaces than we had achieved in the past they meant one open space, then yeah, there's one sniping section with a turret. I wouldn't call a glorified turret section that the base game had done twice before varied or creative. But as far as verticality goes, Reborn fares much better, with multiple arenas that allow you and the enemy to attack from different levels and a set-piece type area that has you working your way through a fallen building. It's on its side, so you're walking on walls and dropping through rooms. The potential for combat here is limitless, but there's nothing. I can't believe the missed opportunity. An Inception-like F.e.a.r combat arena? I don't know why they passed that up with the whole varied and creative design pitch. There's a later arena where the replica assassins can attack from the girders above, while a mech simultaneously attacks from below, both varied from height and from enemy placement. The replica are arranged in a similar fashion, attacking from all manners of nooks and crannies that the construction site setting affords them, and often attacking from behind as well. The game regularly has enemies attack once you've made your way to the exit of an arena, which can be an effective surprise. A new mechanic in Reborn is shown off in the lower levels of one such arena. Replica heavies can smash through plywood dividing the area, and they come from both in front and behind. You're provided with proximity proximity mines and the dust effects coming from the breaking wood to give them away. It's a fun mechanic that sadly only shows up once. Because again, Reborn is only 90 minutes long. It's over before you know it. There's no new weapons and no new enemies, yet this came out 7 months after the base game. How is that possible? That's not just from a level design standpoint, the presentation and story are equally as skeletal. Story I can forgive, it's appropriate enough for the length, just the usual Paxton saying weird things at you. Alma is clearly opposed to the idea of Paxton returning as she shows up in various horror sequences throwing a car at you, commanding the replica to kill you, and teleporting you into some kind of ghost area before you make it to Paxton. It's right under this church-like building, which I can only guess is a reference to Extraction Point where Paxton was originally resurrected. But unlike there, this is at the epicenter of the Vault Blast. There's a giant orange skybeam which I can't be asked to question. The ghost replica come back and try to kill you, but you only need to walk to the other end of the arena and link up with Paxton, who pulls your mask off and melts away to reveal Paxton, who is now officially Baxton. A simple plot to explain a simple point. Fine. What's a little more complex is why Alma is opposed to Paxton. This makes no sense. Throughout all of F.e.a.r 1 and the expansions, Paxton has been nothing but loyal to Alma. He is connected to her, he's her brawn through command of the replica forces. So why exactly would Alma be at all opposed to his return? After talking to my resident F.e.a.r expert, DXFan619, it might have something to do with timelines. This isn't common knowledge, but the original F.e.a.r storyline was initially intended to be much longer and much richer. For the final product, Craig Hubbard had to cut down his story significantly. This included cutting Paxton's motivation for finding Alma. He wanted to eat her to gain her powers, as he's shown doing to random employees in the intro. Maybe Alma allows Paxton to die in the first game because of this alternate timeline. Because originally Paxton was coming to eat her and they kept his death in the game. So if we're obeying the alternate timeline in F.e.a.r 2 and Reborn, it makes sense that she'd want Paxton to remain firmly 6 feet under. And if we ignore the expansions, there's no real conflict with F.e.a.r 1. Paxton's motivations were never explicitly stated other than he wanted to free her. But there's nothing that disproves the idea that he was trying to get close enough to betray her at the last minute. Alma knew this and therefore allowed Paxton to die after he served his purpose. It works. Maybe this story does make sense. That marks 2 out of 2. Both F.e.a.r 2 and Reborn have stories that make perfect sense. I'm proud. And that's where the consistency ends. F.e.a.r 2 looked pretty good. This, however, is the most grey game I think there has ever been, and I'm not just talking about Paxton's hair. Every environment, and I'm actually not exaggerating, is predominantly some shade of grey or brown. It makes fucking Gears of War look like a pride parade. Even thinking about it depresses me. And if you're not depressed yet either, then just sit pretty, because do I have an interview quote for you. If F.e.a.r 2 Reborn was a colour, it wouldn't fit into the normal spectrum of light that we humans can see. We would have to classify a new bandwidth, and it would probably be named action. But of course, this brings a whole slew of problems in the English language whereby people use the word action and are now confused. Wait, do you mean the colour? We here at Monolith Studios do appreciate the language enough to not cause this kind of havoc. So let's just not have the DLC be a colour. Wow, that was the most elaborate way of avoiding the word grey I've ever read. I bet Monolith thought no one would ever end up reading that interview again. This DLC makes Perseus Mandate look like Crisis and F.e.a.r 2 like the landscapes of heaven. When the base game had environments that hold up even today, 9 years and an entire console generation later, I find it hard to believe that this was the best they could do. And no, I don't care that it's near the vault explosion. It didn't have to be, and they could have just made something up. Which is also my thoughts on the horror. They could have just made something up, but they didn't. The horror was lacking in Perseus Mandate, but apart from Alma chucking a car at you, there's barely anything here. Unless you count the ghost replica, which are cool, but I doubt are gonna scare anyone. There's the odd Paxton appearance, but these don't come close to even jump scare quality. They're more there for the story. And the initial Paxton mindjack was great, but it was far from horror. There's a couple of abominations and other horror type enemies that you'll find in Interval 4, but there's nothing done to distinguish them from the ones that you'll have fought 100 times over in the base game. That's not just the enemy design, it's mostly the encounter. Given that this is near the epicenter of the vault explosion and the forces of both Alma and Paxton are at play, the lack of horror makes no sense, and even if there was a reason, this is F.e.a.r. It's no secret that I'm not a big fan of effortless jump scares, but when F.e.a.r uses its lighting and impeccable AI to scare the player, it's one hell of an experience. This is missing from Reborn. It doesn't feel like F.e.a.r, and the base game didn't either, so this might as well be Gears of War. In a DLC about souls, the lack of F.e.a.r's own soul was not what I expected. All in all, Reborn is worth the 90 minutes, but compared to F.e.a.r's previous expansion, expansions, accounting for the length, it's nothing special. Level design is more vertical than the base game, which is an entertaining change. It was fun to play with the replica for the first few minutes. Its story makes sense, which is a miracle, but everything else isn't as good or is missing in comparison to the first expansions. A shame, and a sign of things to come. That said, my purchasing recommendations aren't really relevant. Reborn is not currently for sale, unless that is you want to buy the complete edition with every other F.e.a.r game for $60. Key resellers are hideously bad for business, but I kinda doubt forcing people to use them if all they want to play is a 90-minute DLC is the way to go. And on that note, it's time to end this bite-sized retrospective. Next up is F.e.a.r 3 unless I get alcohol poisoning between now and then.